capable. That is the word I think of to describe the Nintendo Switch 2. 30 days into its initial release. From picking it up on midnight release, hosting a party with various Switch games on launch weekend, to taking it on the go whenever it seems convenient, like a friend's apartment or the DMV. Hell exists, and it's the DMV. I've essentially made sure to incorporate the Switch 2 in varying areas of my life to bring you my unbiased opinion of the console, to help you decide if the Switch 2 is worth your hard-earned Benjamins, or equivalent. I don't know where you're watching this from. So buckle in. Be sure to like this video, helps out a ton, and subscribe if you're new. In order to discuss my thoughts on the Switch 2, let's turn back time a bit to discuss my experiences with the original Nintendo Switch. I was a vivid user of the original Nintendo Switch. I started out in the early days playing Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, a few other heavy hitters, but the main focus soon became Smash Bros. Ultimate. Not only had the game been the most popular title amongst my friend group, but it also introduced me to the world of esports. So I've competed as well as hosted both in-person and online Smash Ultimate tournaments during this time, and with that, put my day one Switch to work, day and night! With over 3,500 hours accumulated with this game alone, my original Switch had become a core element to my own entertainment. It's been to my friends' houses, in car rides, airplanes, trains, vacations, and none of that even comes close to the hours I spent running to develop my own content here online. It was safe to say that I derived a lot of value from my original Nintendo Switch. The transportability and convenience paired with some of my favorite video game titles to date getting releases on this console meant that this was a console that was a match made in heaven for me. I wasn't the vocal majority who had many problems with the original Nintendo Switch. The ergonomics of the original Joy-Cons, the console's overall size, and several other factors were perfectly suited for a consumer like myself. That wasn't the case for the majority though. The bezel on the tablet resulting in the smaller screen, that fucking kickstand that I hate, and even more controller issues like Joy-Con drift and those itty-bitty shoulder buttons on the sides of the Joy-Cons that give your index finger its first Charlie horse. It made the convenience of the Switch less appealing for some, and that results in a hybrid piece of hardware that's only being utilized as a home console when your most comfortable playing style is at home with a Pro Controller. So, if you're one of these consumers that's been on the fence about getting a Switch 2, this video isn't meant to be a bullet point list of why you should or shouldn't buy it, but rather give you more of an insight as to what pros and cons, see what I did there, I've noticed within the past 30 days that you could consider when deciding if this is the hybrid console that you could sink thousands of hours into, just like I did. Most of my own criticisms from the original Nintendo Switch stem from one main thing: software performance. Considering this was a one-of-a-kind hybrid console experience, I had finally decided that the Switch was going to be my main platform for a majority of my gaming library. And though I was confident in my decision at the time, my opinion had changed fairly quickly with one singular game: Doom. 2016. After seeing its performance on other consoles like Xbox One and PlayStation 4 at the time, I was really disappointed to see how it underperformed in comparison. So me, uninformed on hardware specs and how the hardware optimization works, took to the internet to learn that yes, Doom runs at a constant 30 FPS on the original Switch. This was a reoccurring theme throughout the original Switch's entire life cycle with various titles that I cared about. If it wasn't a first-party Nintendo title, it saw significant performance decreases that inevitably convinced me to buy that game on another console. Now, seeing as to how the general consumer doesn't always seem to care about performance, which I wholeheartedly understand, I can also say that as long as the game has depth and lots of replayability, you shouldn't let the performance of the game deter you from playing the game entirely because of the hardware it runs on. Only problem was, at some point, the quality of the game started to suffer because of it. A consistent frame rate, quality online connections, and other performance enhancements not only deliver on a more immersive gameplay experience, but it also doesn't limit the game's capabilities either. I feel like the original Switch's hardware jeopardizes some of its best titles and beyond in more ways than one with these types of issues. If you don't believe me, take a look at Hyrule Warriors. God, like, what's happening here? Regardless of my experiences, not everyone will encounter the issues I seem to have with my original Switch. And fortunately, a good handful of those issues seem to be ironed out with the Switch 2. So let's dive into both the good and the bad with the Switch 2, and the conditions in which a Switch 1 might be a better bang for your buck. I'll start with the console in handheld mode. It's midnight o'clock, June 5th, and I'm unboxing the Switch 2. My mind is focused on several things: my live stream, chat, and how heavy this console is. The size increase and beefier hardware in the Switch 2 results in a console that's a ½ inch taller in height, just under an inch thick in width, and 4 ounces heavier in weight. with the Joy-Cons attached. And though these measurements might not seem like a big deal for some, it results in a heavier console you might need to take time to adjust to. This adjustment to the system's size is not only noticeable when you're actively playing, but also storing it away can be a bit more inconvenient too. Whereas the original Switch could fit in some pretty tight spots like a car's glove box or my pocket, the Switch 2 is very much a premium console that demands even the cheapest carrying case you can find to protect itself from being scratched. Though the Switch 2 is protected by a very durable glass screen and automatically applied screen protector, the screen protector itself is prone to scratching, so you'll want to avoid storing the lone console in the same spots as you would keys or other sharp metal objects. Because though the screen protector is meant to keep the internal glass screen from shattering, it's advised that you should never remove it. The system's overall size and additional weight creates more convenience in other areas it was lacking before, while also presenting new issues that are noticeable after long play sessions. Personally, I started to feel some cramping during long play sessions in handheld mode. I first noticed playing Super Mario Bros. Wonder. While I usually always hold down the B button to sprint, I could feel my thumb was constantly tensed up, causing some discomfort after playing for a while. This isn't something I experienced while playing in docked mode with the Joy-Con grip, however. So I think my issues stem from the combination of both the console's size and the Joy-Con's increase in size. Now, comfort is a key factor for any handheld console, so seeing as to how I'd never had this issue with the original Switch, makes for a much bigger inconvenience in comparison. But aside from that negative experience, most of my time in handheld mode was more consistent with my experiences with the original Switch. For one, the FPS increase in handheld mode alone makes the console feel like a miniature supercomputer. Its improved kickstand allows for more flexible ways to play, and also completely eliminates the problem of the screen being too small when sharing amongst friends. Screen brightness is solid, though some people claim to have issues with it when playing in direct sunlight, though I see this as a non-issue because, like, why are you playing right above the sun, bro? The one and only caveat I see being a persistent issue in the long term would have to do with the Switch 2's battery life. On maximum charge, when faced with a more graphically intense game, the system's battery life spans about 2 hours and some change. That's more than enough for the average person playing these more demanding games, but fortunately now, the console comes with 2 USB-C ports, which is just perfect. The console needed that. The console needed it. Battery life varies depending on which game you're playing and for how long, so maybe an extra charger with a battery bank could come in handy on longer trips away from your dock. Alright! We're done with handheld! Put it in the dock! Turn that shit on! Upon slapping that fresh console with that new car smell into your new beefed up Switch 2 dock, you're met with the interface that is both familiar but also multifaceted. If you just booted up the console being flashbanged and your first reaction is, well, this looks like shit, then congratulations! You just witnessed a poor implementation of HDR. Or high dynamic range. Fortunately though, there is a way to adjust this setting while also forcing it to only apply to games that utilize it properly. So, when you adjust that, there you go. It's good to note that the Switch 2 automatically converts the TV's best output resolution when docked, so you won't have to necessarily change the settings every time you bring it to a new TV. This does create the issue with some previous Switch titles that aren't fully optimized, appearing more pixelated and stretched out, as some would say. Though this isn't necessarily an issue that is super noticeable on higher resolution displays. A lot of these issues are on a case-by-case basis, but it's most important to understand the differences that your TV or monitor is capable of displaying before you criticize any game's optimization on the console. Though some games on the Switch 2 look and perform their best in specific situations, whether that be single player in Mario Kart World or spawning in 16 ice climbers all at once in Smash Ultimate, it all boils down to the capability of the software and how efficiently it can render what you're looking at. I think my Switch 2's weakest moment would be Mario Kart World 4-player local co-op. You see, despite Mario Kart World's beautiful performance in both single-player and even 2-player mode, the game's performance stoops back down to a stable, yet noticeable 30 FPS when playing 3 or 4-player co-op, while also, and what I think is the most unfortunate part about this issue, introducing input lag for all 4 players involved. Which is, like, pretty fucking bad if you bought these. Like, all of my friends are coming from the Wii Mario Kart, and these with input delay, it's just ass. It's just absolute ass. This is caused by the game being forced to render itself in 4 separate instances, something that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe also struggled with. While this is a hardware limitation that is extremely difficult to eliminate entirely, this was something that I wanted to mention. While yes, the Switch 2 has some significant performance increases in just about every area, it isn't perfect. So take off those rose-tinted glasses. But it's a shame to see the issues seemingly get worse as a compromise for an improved single-player experience, since this is usually a game most enjoyed with friends in a party setting, which is why I emphasize that these types of performance issues can occur depending on what type of game and in what context you're playing it in. The Switch 2 also comes with an upgraded Wi-Fi chip and built-in LAN port, which in any instance, the upgrade is appreciated and will go a long way as time goes on. But for fans of quality online play, nothing unfortunately changes the netcode that the previous gen Switch games operate from. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. It's just about the same. All of the original controllers and more work normally on the Switch 2, with the exception of certain off-brand GameCube adapters having issues. The original Switch Joy-Cons can also work properly on the Switch 2. In fact, a bit too well, to the point to where you can do this?
Who is doing this? Why?
There's also a newly added feature that I think every Switch 2 owner should enable, being stop charging at 90%, which essentially prevents your system's battery from constantly being fed power in docked mode to preserve the health of your system's battery. Trust me, you don't want to wake up one morning to notice that your Switch 2 came packaged with a spicy pillow, like my old one. Overall, the Switch 2's capabilities are vast and create more convenience than not for the hardcore video game enthusiast. But if you're someone who leans more casual with your video games, a lot of these improved features could come off as a bit overkill depending on your playing habits. I think of players who invest hours upon hours in a game like Stardew Valley, or other relatively cozy game that doesn't require nearly as much horsepower to function normally. If you're most interested in a handful of previous gen Switch games, the Switch 2 might be a bit overkill despite its better hardware and capabilities. But don't let this deter you from considering the upcoming Switch 2 library, as that's something you'll very obviously miss out on if you're sticking with getting an original Switch. But if you're considering upgrading for the sake of playing the most anticipated upcoming titles, as well as original Switch games, you'll be glad to know that a majority of these titles are actively being enhanced for the Switch 2. Though at times, with a price tag attached to it, which I completely disagree with. Don't pay $10 to upgrade a game, it's just not worth it. An overwhelming majority of titles are seeing performance improvements despite these patches. Hell, even some games that developers had originally intended to run at a more consistent frame rate, for example, on the Switch 1, saw enhancements immediately on new hardware. These comparisons can get a bit overwhelming, so to make it easier for yourself, research your top 3 games you anticipate playing on your Switch of choice, and see if there are performance comparison videos on YouTube for that specific software, and base your decision on upgrading off of that if you think that's something worth upgrading to. Though I think this opinion might be a bit controversial, it's not that the Switch 2 might or might not be worth the upgrade, but it's more or less investing into the variation of the console that fits your lifestyle better. I'm someone who enjoys both casual gameplay alongside the more immersive nature that more graphically demanding games offer. The Switch 2 is conveniently a console that delivers on the best of both worlds. I'm someone who's confident that I'll be sinking those hours into the system and getting my money's worth out of it. But even if you're slightly on the fence about it, considering a Switch 1 OLED, which by far has the best battery life I might add, or even a Switch Lite, is still entirely plausible and a worthwhile investment depending on your gaming habits. In conclusion, I derived a lot of value out of the original Switch and plan to do the same thing on the upgraded hardware of the Switch 2. Does that sound like you? The Switch 2 might be your console of choice. Are you more casual and just want a transportable system to play a handful of your favorite games on? I consider the Switch 1, for at least as long as the third-party library on that console is supported. Did I miss a key point you wanted me to talk about in this video? Go yell at me in the comments. But regardless, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
And scene! Woo!